All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and let me look around who we want to lead today. How about we have our folks in the back over there lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today? Yes, I think that would be nice. We need that.
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone, and have a seat.
Wow, well done. Very well done. Thank you. All right, folks, we'll move on to 1.3, approval of the agenda.
Second.
All right, it was moved by Dr. Flores and second by Vice President Tillman. Any questions on the agenda or comments? All right, let's go ahead and vote on the agenda. It will be verbal. I'll start with Dr. Daddy Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Abigail Rosales Medina.
Aye.
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 Mr. Tillman.
Aye.
And aye. Sorry about that. Maybe if we're all getting too close at the same time,
Yeah.
so we'll kind of step back. All righty, folks, we are now to 2.0 closed session, 2.1 closed session public comments. I apologize, I don't have my glasses on. Should be able to read that, but just in case. This is a time that members of the public will be provided an opportunity to directly address the board about any items discussed under 2.2 closed session agenda. Public comments are limited to 5 minutes per person. Speakers are cautioned that under California law, no person is immune from liability for making intentionally false or defamatory comments regarding any person simply because these comments are made at a public meeting. Comments on any other subject matter with the board's jurisdiction may be addressed during the next regular board meeting on Tuesday, June 7th, 2022. I believe we had one public comment. Is it online or in person?
Currently, we're only doing closed session public comments, and I don't have any for that. We'll do public comments when we come out.
We'll do that when we return. So at this time, we will convene to closed session. Thank you. All right, folks, we're coming back out of closed session. We'll come back in session for our public meeting, our workshop, and there was no action to report out, I believe, from closed session, so we'll move on to 3.1, that was 3.1. So move on to 4.0 and 4.1, public comments, and I believe we had no public comments. Thank you, Karen, so I don't have to read that all over again, which makes that nice. And then we'll move on to 4.2, budget workshop, and that's been prepared by Ms. Applegate and Mr. Solon, so we'll give it off to you two. Thank you.
Thank you, Board President and Dr. Wyatt, Board Vice President Mr. Tillman, members of the board. This evening, staff will be presenting information on the budget and Lcap development, including new information related to the governor's recently announced May revision and impacts to the SBC-USD budget. So here are our objectives this evening. So we want to share the info from the May revise, specifically education-related investments and the impact to SBC-USD. We're going to provide the board with an update on one-time funding, as has been requested in the past, as well as highlight a few key changes that affect the Lcap and budget. And our Ed Services team will review the annual update, priorities, and goals for our Lcap this evening. So general takeaways from the governor's May revise. When the governor proposed the budget back in January, he took a more middle-of-the-road approach when he was projecting revenues. Since that time, we've seen revenues grow considerably and outpace those projections set forth in January, ultimately leaving the state with a budget surplus of $49.2 billion discretionary. And when I say discretionary, I mean dollars that can be used for discretionary purposes. There are other surplus dollars that are the state puts towards debt and other required uses. So what that means for education is under the test one for Prop 98 funding, that guarantees that the districts or school districts across the state are to get the most advantageous funding model. And for this represents about a little over 38% of total general fund revenues for the district or for districts, or $19.1 billion in surplus. So as a result of those general fund revenue increases, the Prop 98 funding guarantee has risen from $102 billion, which was proposed in January, to $110.3 billion, an increase of $8.3 billion just announced in May. Yes, ma'am.
So the general fund, 19.9 is different
So yes, so they're separate. So we get a portion, well, they're not separate. So when I say 38% of general fund revenues that go into Prop 98, that includes the surplus. So of that 49.2 billion, that 38% is 19.1 billion. So that goes in, that is Prop 98. That is Prop 98.
So is that about 40 million to us?
Yeah, if you were to distribute on a per pupil basis, correct. Correct, and we'll walk the board through with just how he's allocated those resources, both in one-time and ongoing sources. So great questions. So with the additional resources, as kind of alluded to, the governor provided an increase to LCFF funding via the statutory COLA. So he raised it from what he proposed in January, which was at 5.33%, to 6.56%, which is the statutory COLA. In addition, the governor provided an additional increase to the base funding, so outside of the cost of living adjustment. So, and as we know, the way that supplemental and concentration grant dollars are calculated, they're calculated on the base. So anytime the base funding increases, our supplemental and concentration dollars will increase as well. Additionally, the governor continues to support investments in his school transformation agenda, which we're going to recap with the board in the next slide.
Can I ask
Yes.
you a question? In terms of the LCFF, did something new happen where I know we always had the base funding, then you got additional funding for people who one of the categories were lower socioeconomics, right?
Correct.
And then they come back and say, okay, on top of that, if you're foster youth and an English language learner, that you'll get additional money?
So great question. So the LCAP or supplemental concentration has always been for the three populations: low income, English learners, and foster youth. So the way that supplemental, they provide funding for every child who falls into one of those categories in the district. For concentration grant, they provide funding for every student above 55% in that. So while you don't get concentration for every student, you do get a greater rate in the concentration grant calculation. So concentration grant funding actually outpaces supplemental grant funding for us. So despite the positive budget news, the governor is striking a cautious tone. And he cites several factors, including inflation, the volatility with the stock market that we've seen recently, as well as the war in the Ukraine, in addition, as well as supply and labor supply shortages. So what that really means to us and what we're hearing from a lot of sources, we have several economic indicators that are signaling a recession is on the horizon. Now, we've heard that in many different meetings. A recession's coming. We don't really know when it's coming, but the earliest we've heard that it could be predicted is middle of 2023. So again, we don't know the degree, the severity. It could be a mild recession. It could be a more significant recession. All of that is still speculation at this time, but those are what some of those economic indicators are signaling for us. Okay, so this is a slide that we've shared with the board in the past several times, and this is to highlight the proposals for school transformation that Governor Newsom has taken on as part of his agenda. So we can see, and I won't go through them, but some of the key highlights are the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program grant, the Universal TK program, which commences beginning in 2022-23. As well as investments for universal meals, which is California is the first in the nation to offer that. More states are following, but that's a recent change. As we looked at the May revise, one thing that was very clear from school districts and advocates was the request not to provide new additional programs or categorical programs for districts to implement. We have a lot on our plate just with reopening schools, and then on top of it, expanding many program after program after program. So fortunately for us, the governor listened, and we'll talk about the ways that he listened to that in some of the proposals that he included in the May revise. So this graphic shows the ongoing education investments that the governor proposed. The dark blue line compared to the orange line. The orange line is the May revision amount. So we can see those orange bars have grown significantly, and we have some new investments that were not previously included in the governor's January proposal. Overall, the governor is proposing $12.7 billion in ongoing investments. The largest of that, representing $10 billion of that $12.7 billion, are where you start on the left-hand side of the chart, beginning with the cost of living adjustment and the ADA mitigation or three-year averaging solutions that the governor's proposed. In addition, the governor, as I mentioned, provided additional LCFF base funding, which is that second from the left, and then growth on the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program funding. Again, those three categories alone represent $10 billion of the $12.7 billion proposed for ongoing investments. So next slide. Here we have the table shows the major investments, both ongoing and one-time, in the governor's May revision budget. It's important to note that the governor and the legislature are still continuing to negotiate. So any changes that are likely to occur, changes will likely occur, and they will impact the numbers that are represented here. And as we move forward, once the board adopts a formal budget, any changes that comes in the ultimate state enacted budget will be represented in a 45-day budget revision that we would bring back to the board in August. So just some of the highlights, as mentioned earlier, $6.2 billion was invested to increase the base funding. That's $2.1 billion of that 6.2 is for increase in base funding. In addition, the increase to the 6.56 COLA as well as the ADA mitigation. So that represents the $6.2 billion in total. What that means for San Bernardino as compared to the funding that we received this year is an additional $30.7 million ongoing. Additional. Yeah. So just to put it in perspective, we have 601 million this year. It goes up to 632 million next year. So the next one is, and this was the new proposal that wasn't in the governor's January proposal, and this goes back to his cautionary tales about the looming recession, where the governor has committed that of the budget surplus at $49.2 billion in discretionary surplus, 94% of that is committed to one-time purposes. So he's signaling the commitment not to make new ongoing commitments by doing so. However, one of the biggest, most significant increases is an $8 billion one-time discretionary grant provided to districts. And for districts like San Bernardino, that's approximately $60 million, one-time discretionary dollars for us.
And that means we can decide to target whatever priorities.
Correct, there are no strings attached. So one-time funding will roll over. Typically, and if you recall, this was the tactic that Governor Brown used very frequently, providing large one-time infusions of cash for districts to use at their discretion.
What Dr. Wyatt asked, we can roll it over if we don't use it all.
Yeah, it would fall.
Okay.
It would fall to fund balance.
Okay,
Correct.
thank
Okay.
you.
No problem. And so the other one that we've spoken about in the past and a presentation was provided previously was the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant. This year, we received $27.8 million because of the additional acceleration of investments from the governor. He's looking to fully implement it where he previously had looked to implement it over a 3 to 4 year period. So that funding is projected to increase to $59.6 million for those expanded learning opportunity programs.
President Wyatt, I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, Dr. Flores, and let me just ask real quick, Ms. Solon, is there a break in here anywhere for questions, or, 'cause I know we
There
try
is
to
not.
get through them, so I don't want to always keep interrupting, but if there's questions that need clarification, let's do it.
That's fine, we can take
All right,
them.
Dr. Flores?
So is this discretionary money, 59.6 million, just targeted for expanded learning opportunity programs?
That's correct. This is a restricted program.
A restricted program? And what does that include, the expanded learning opportunity program?
So for
What
us,
services are there?
so we have a slide that's going to talk a little bit about the services.
Okay.
That's going to be presented by
Okay.
Ann Pearson.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so this is like 24 point something billion dollars. So ballpark, that's like another $122 million. And this is not counting the money from ESSER, right? We still got ESSER money left over, right? I just sense the disconnect. So I'm glad we have the folks here that do the programs. For instance, in our summer program, we didn't do a sunrise at the elementary schools. Now, I know they probably say, hey, it's not regular school, but there's some parents that aren't going to participate because they can't get their kids to school at 9:30 versus if we had the sunrise program, we could drop them off at 7:30. And if our goal is to use the additional money to mitigate the circumstances of COVID, why would we spend the money or at least try to do the sunrise programs at the elementary school? Is there a reason why we didn't try to do it?
So I will defer to Dr. Rodriguez. Is she here?
Yes, the reason that we didn't get to do it this year, back here, is that we didn't have enough staff. So all of our vendors did not have enough staff to even totally staff the programs that we had in place. Our intent was, we did have funds to be able to expand it to all of our elementary schools, to get rid of waiting lists, but also to expand it at every campus. It was just that we didn't have enough people.
But I'm talking about for the summer program. Did we ask them if they wanted to participate for the summer programs?
We do have sunrise, no, we did not, we've never done sunrise before in our summer program, so no, we did not ask.
And is it too late to ask? It's too late to ask?
I don't know if it would be too late to ask. I'd have to defer that to Ann Pearson.
Hello? Yes, summer school does start at 8 o'clock, so
It
it's
does?
an hour earlier than normal.
Okay, maybe the parents
We
don't
can
know
do
that. So all the summer schools are starting at 8 at the elementary schools? All right, and have we sent out a message to the parents, tell them that?
Yes, we have it on the website, and they got messages about it as well.
All right, I'll tell the parent. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So in addition, we did receive a small increase to a special education, our base grant funding for special education programs. So that's projected to be $5 million to our district. And so as the board's aware, you know, the funding that we receive from state and federal sources for special education program is inadequate. And so the district has a large contribution that we make to cover the cost of special education programs. So this is additional funding that can be used to offset the contribution that the district made out of the unrestricted general fund to support. And then lastly, Universal TK, this funding is provided for base grant. So we receive funding for ADA, just like we do all of our other grade levels. But in addition to the ADA that we will receive from our TK expansion, we'll also receive an additional add-on funding per ADA, which equates to about $2,800 per ADA this year, and is expected to increase over the next several years. And just for the clarification from the board, I shared the increase from the ongoing investments, but for the one-time investments that were proposed in January by the governor, they were a total of $4 billion. When he announced during his May revise, those one-time investments went up to $16.8 billion. So again, signals a large portion of that surplus was being put towards one-time uses. Okay. Yes.
I know you haven't gotten there yet, Mr. Sullins, but number 6, 7, 8, and 9 says to be determined. Why is that to be determined?
Great question. So the reason those are to be determined are because we're still waiting for budget trailer bill language, and these in particular are subjects of negotiation with the legislature. So to put in perspective, the Assembly and the Senate both have their own plans that differ in various ways from the governor's. And so when we spoke with Assembly member Reyes, she indicated that right now the Senate and Assembly are aligned, and they are going to be advocating. So while the governor did propose these items in the May revise, there's not enough information to quantify them for what they would mean to our district, in particular because they are likely to change based on the negotiations.
So are they negotiating it in the budget committee?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when will we know? Do you know?
So there's no timeline for that. However, the legislature has a statutory requirement to pass a budget by June 15th.
Okay, so
They
by
have
then-
not missed that because their paycheck is tied to
Right.
that passage.
Okay, so by then we should know.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So as had previously been requested by the board, we wanted to provide the board with update on our one-time funding. So the first slide is our federal one-time funding. We note that the ESSER 1 funding is not included here. That is because the ESSER 1 funding is projected to be fully expended this year. So remaining federal funds, ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, of the $102.3 million for ESSER 2, we're projected at this point to spend $75.4 million. We have until September of 2023 to fully expend these funds. If we look at ESSER 3, We have just under $230 million. Thus far, we've spent just a little over $38 million. We have additional time until September 2024 to expend these funds. The one thing that I would note for the board, because if you look at ESSER 3, of that significant amount that we've been allocated, $38 million does not seem a lot. But we have to put it into perspective that the board approved the ESSER 3 plan in late October. So in terms of ramping up to expend funds, we're making progress. As we move into the next 2 years, we expect that these expenditures will accelerate.
You know, it's a lot of money. It's a lot. Somebody else's mic on?
Oh, sorry.
So there's a lot of money here. So in terms of ongoing funds, so I just want to say, you know, because we always talk about deficit spending in a bad way, but I want to be open and transparent. In order to spend this money, you're going to do managed deficit spending. There's no way to spend this kind of money without deficit spending.
That's correct.
Because you have the money already, so you're going to be expending more money than you're bringing in, even though you're bringing in a lot of money. So the next question becomes, once we expend this extra money, is what the budget outlook is going to look like. So, and I'm bringing it up because we know that we use some of this extra money to balance the budget.
Correct.
So we gave our pay raises with the thought that, hey, we're going to use some of this one-time money, and we're just going to hope for the best past 2024, right?
Correct.
And our hopes came true because we did get additional money.
Correct.
Ongoing money.
Correct.
So the key is going to be now to back out that money that we said we're going to use ESSER for.
Correct.
And use the new ongoing money, and then truly spend this money as one-time money.
That's correct, and a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up. You know, so when we look at these amounts, so if you look at that ESSER $2 amount, if we move some of those expenses that to some of our new ongoing funds to support, that ESSER expenditure amount will go down. However, we will replace them with additional one-time expenditures that are truly one-time in nature. So you're correct.
And then my final thing, I may as well say it here, I was going to wait to the end, but I know in the past we've given teachers a stipend. I don't know, are we still giving a stipend for supplies?
Oh, yes, so we do still give that stipend.
And I would look at increasing it because of inflation, so we can have the discussion later?
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
And just piggybacking on what Mr. Tillman said, it would be nice to see where the money is going that is one time and how we're picking up based on the ongoing. So it would be important for us as a board to see the allocations by category.
Absolutely.
I think we need that so that we can see where it is, because as we look at the extra money that we have, you know, what are our priorities? What are the priorities that the board is going to choose in terms of designating, you know, where our goals are in terms of supporting our sites, supporting, you know, initiatives and so forth. So it would be really prudent for you to provide us that information.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that comment as well. So as we move close to closing this year's books, we'll see kind of where all the funds settle, and as Mr. Tillman alluded to, if we do move funds out of the ESSER into these new one-time or these new funding sources, that's going to change. And so I would recommend that once that sort of settles, we can come back to the board with those categories and identify what are some available sources for board priorities. Okay. So great comment.
And a lot of these will be addressed also when we go into the top 10, that maybe with some of the expenditures and areas. But I do agree with Dr. Flores, is that looking at how we can, because a lot of us have our also, you know, some of our priorities that we want to invest money in. I know for me, it's trying to look at mental health. centers at all high school. I know that's more of an ongoing, but building the structure for it at the local level, I think it is feasible using this. But that would be something that when you bring us those categories, that how much money has been or would be spent, and then aligning it also with the top 10 as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So if we just look at the total of the expenditures, it looks like to date we are plan to expend about a third of the funds that we have available. So, we still have time, so we're in a good position to fully expend those funds, and we're working with our budget managers to make sure that we are expending the funds before those deadlines. So the next slide is for the state one-time funding, and that's the state AB 86, or the Expanded Learning Opportunities grant, which is not to be confused with the Expanded Opportunities Learning Program. Go figure, right? So we received a much...
this is additional.
This is additional state
Okay.
funding. And if you recall, the board passed a plan in May of 2021 to address these funds, because these funds were intended in particular to address unfinished learning. So there is a plan in place. And so of that plan, $38.3 million that were awarded for the core AB 86 fund, we've spent just under $19.5 million. We also had a separate allocation, which had to be 10% of the total award for paraprofessional support. We can see that we spent about a third of that funding thus far. We do have some of these funds designated as we move towards the summer programming, that these funds will continue to be expended during those programs. Yeah. So we've just spent just under half of these resources based on this information.
Also in the ESSER, I recall that there was 3.5 million designated for paraprofessionals. That number
No.
sticks in my mind.
No, it's actually AB 86 that you're referring to.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, it's this AB 86 that you're referring to. The ESSER 3 funds has a call out for 20% of the funds to be used for learning loss or unfinished learning,
Okay, so
but not
that's
paraprofessional.
very different.
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
yeah. So it was this one.
Correct.
Okay, all
Correct.
right, got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, and with that, I am going to turn the microphone over to Ms. Ann Pearson from our Director of CAPS, who will talk us through the Expanded Learning Program funds.
Good evening. I'm okay from over here? So we refer to our Expanded Learning Opportunity Program funding as to what the state calls it as well, a dream. This is what your dream expanded learning program can be. So on this slide, you can see that in this school year, 21-22, we had $27.8 million. And fully funded for next year will be over $59 million. So there's a lot of dreams that can be funded with that. Some of the graphics up on that slide are just a few of the initiatives that we have going. We started lifeguard training. You may or may not be aware that a certification costs a little over $200 per student, which is a lot of money for our kiddos. But what a great skill to have to be trained as a lifeguard, because they're in constant need of them. YMCA, Red Cross, everywhere. So we've implemented that last month at San G, as well as swim instructor training and lifeguard training this summer at Cajon during their summer school. Some students decide to take a PE class during the summer, not because they're behind, but because they want another elective. So they do that. That's a lot of swimming for 6 hours, right? So Dr. Bishop, the principal over there, had this wonderful idea once she heard about the training and saying, why not have them work for something? Sorry, that's somebody, not me. What we're offering is with the YMCA, partnered up with the YMCA, they're going to come out to that summer school swim class for June, and they're going to offer both lifeguard training and swim instructor training, including them prepping, because it's quite a pretest to take to qualify to even take the classes. So the students that have signed up for swimming over at Cajon will be doing that. Of course, the ulterior motive is to train our kiddos here, right? So that we can hire them, so then in the future, we'll be able to offer swim classes and lifeguards for in order to make sure all of our kids in San Bernardino City can swim. A lot of scary statistics when it comes to the number one cause of accidental death under 5, which is drowning. So some of the steps we're taking to get moving on that and make our kids employable. And maybe have a little more inspiration for swimming for 4 weeks at the high school. Also starting next year with this money, we are implementing Sunrise at all of our elementary schools. When late start occurs, a year later or so now that we have a little reprieve, we will be needing at the middle and high schools as well, so we're going to expand the following year. Outdoor learning, there's a lot of exciting projects that facilities and expanded learning has talked about, bringing the outside in and the inside out at several of our before and after school programs. We've talked about some different projects, including things I'd never heard of, like a roll-up wall where in the CAPS room you can be in and out at the same time, really encouraging that. And of course, we have a big emphasis on our STEAM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Our summer school portion of CAPS, there is 2.5 hours specifically dedicated to that. The staff at CAPS Central have wrote lesson plans for all of that. We have a lot of interactive hands-on items for them to do. We have hummingbird kits, Robotify, we have Meet the Masters. We're also having an entire Lego engineering section of it. Never knew all the different things you could do with Legos till we went to a couple of the conferences for that. So a lot of exciting things going on. And we also have a few animaker spaces going in at Chavez and Del Vallejo, which look amazing and are things that we really feel like our students will benefit from. Also on June 1st, which is tomorrow, not to make any principals nervous that are watching this right now, we have what we call their dream plan. We made the CAPS Principals Advisory Committee made a very simple template for them consisting of what their dream plan was and what they needed to do to implement it, whether it was materials or teacher hours, whatever it was, to do clubs. And so those are due tomorrow. And just as a little sample of some of the ideas I've already seen, someone has a dream at one of the elementary schools where there's environmental science, and they said in a few years when they really get all the growing started with their gardens and the flowers, they want to have a farmer's market, a neighborhood farmer's market in a few years when they have enough to sustain that. And they're also talking about when they have enough flowers, they want to reach out for a florist to come and maybe start a little career pathway at the elementary school on designing floral arrangements using the flowers that they grow at their own campus. So it's just so exciting to see these things and these plans come in. They truly is dream money for expanded learning. So I think I'm just lucky that I get to do like the fun slide, right? All the exciting things that are happening, and really just the limit is the imagination, and really having really great buy-in with our expanded learning program. It's really going to be a truly expanded part of the day now, instead of just something that might have happened before or after school. And I could probably go on for a long time, so I'll stop.
Couple questions on that
Yes,
slide.
of course.
I believe Mr. Vice President Tillman and Dr. Flores. Anyone else? Mr. Rosales Medina, thank you.
In terms of these items, have we gotten input from each principal?
So we're calling it the Dream Plan. It's that very simple template that they're going to turn into us hopefully by tomorrow. I've got a few entries, so that is what they want to do. They're telling us what they want to do at their school site, each of the principals.
So yes, Mr. Tillman, every principal has input in their program. They're actually going to work to design it.
So, because this is, and I don't know if this is the area or excluded, but for example, at San Andreas, where they have the
Growing Hope Farm.
the plant farm, they said that they had a few $100,000. They had this thing that would be a big deal. It would fix a lot of stuff. Have they got input?
Yes, we're offering it with this expanded learning opportunity program money. The schools that before were not funded with ACES or 21st Century are being funded. So they are also going to turn in that plan. Every single school gets to turn in that plan of what they'd like.
Then I guess maybe my comments should be directed at Mr. Stoll. I just want to make sure, regardless of these categories, with this one-time money, that the sites that have these things that they want at the top of their head, that they be able to use these funding to do it. It would be a shame if they did. I shouldn't go to a site and have a principal say, man, if we could just have X, because they should be able to get that right now. And I like the way we have these items. I looked through the presentation. Is there anything on here where there's an item for the costs associated with early start?
With what?
With the early start? I mean, the news. Yeah, whatever it's going to take to do it. Is there an item in here that talks about funding that's going to take for us to pull off early start next year?
For the late start program?
Late start.
No, so that would actually, because that would impact the 23-24 budget year, that would be information that we would provide in the coming year to prepare the board for the cost.
Well, I guess my right, and you're
Oh,
right, what Dr. Menards is saying. There are things that we know have to spend money on this year in order to
Oh,
prepare
correct.
for that year.
Yes.
So I would like to see an item here somewhere that says, hey, we have this money, and here's how we're going to facilitate late start. I was saying early start,
Okay.
but late start. I think that's important.
I see your point. So we do have another presentation next week, so we can certainly include that information.
That's a big deal.
Yep.
And I just wanted to add, Mr. Tillman, that with the ELOP funds, we do anticipate being able to support late start. So for example, we're going to be working with facilities in order to put in the lighting that we need after school because of late start, meaning that, our kids are going to be on campuses later, which would require more light. And so we'll be able to absorb some of those costs within our after-school program money.
Somewhere documented. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
All right, Dr. Flores.
Yes, Mr. Tillman, this is ongoing money. It's not one-time money. 59.6 million is
I'm
ongoing.
just talking about money in general, Dr. Flores.
Okay, you're just talking about
I
money.
don't care what it is. Yeah.
Okay, so I like that it's ongoing money. And so my question is, what are I know we went to Hunt, Mr. Tillman and I, and they showed us the STEAM lab. So are you seeing STEAM labs as their wish? Okay, so.
We probably have about 10 of those plans in. It's a really busy time of the year right now. And several of them have STEAM labs or something like that for sure.
Yeah. And then I'm really an advocate for VAPA. And so I wonder, if we have, if some schools want to expand, their music program, their performing arts programs. Pardon me? Yeah, buying new instruments and so forth. And then I know that some schools I know that some schools want to do after-school ballet folklorico, right? So that's going to be part of it. So that's really great.
To add, Dr. Flores, so this last contract, or last board meeting, we did have a contract for Ballet Folklorico, so that we
remember
would have
that,
that at every school in our after-school program. We also told the principals, as part of their dream plan, they could add, we wanted them to think about, in their head, what would students of affluence or school districts of affluence, what kind of program would they have for their kids? So parents who have affluence have tutoring, they have at-home tutors, they have singing classes, piano lessons, dance courses, all
Great.
after school. And so what we have looked at is how are we providing the same type of service with the money that we have to provide a comparable experience for our students in the after-school programs here.
I was at Chavez and at the Heritage Festival program, and the kids carry around the guitars, and at lunch they're forming a banda group. That's amazing. So I hope we can support that. And I think also at Arroyo they formed their own little group. I mean, because that's the kind of music that they like. So I think we should be supporting them and all of that. And
And some of the other things that we're trying to do is partner with like Looking Glass Studios so that our kids can be part of the Nutcracker, so they can be part of Junior University. So there's lots of programs that are throughout the city that we're looking forward to partnering with so that our kids have the same experiences and won't have to pay for that. It's something that the district does for them. And so we're looking at expanding
Yeah.
all of those for them.
And that brings me to materials for art. I mean, all the different aspects of art, not just, painting, right? But just, I hope that principals are asking for those things and teachers are too, and all of that.
We have a new vendor who has an amazing program that we're starting with, and just so you know, Scott Nelson, I'm going to give him a shout out. The VAPA coordinator is already spending ELOP money, a few million already on new instruments and all of
Okay,
that.
good.
That is already he made his dream plan first. He made sure he turned that in right away. So I know that a lot of it has already been ongoing. They got a new vendor, and so I know that more instruments are on their way. So
That's great. Okay, thanks. Thank you so much.
All right, Ms. Rosales Medina.
And I'll just be really quick, because I'm hoping that maybe in the district, I don't know if this would be district-wide, but robotics competitions, I've seen other high schools have that. Do we have, or unless we do have a high school's robotics competition that's more of a statewide versus just the local ones? So we do have one?
not that I know
Yes,
of yet.
yes, we do. We do. We actually have C-Perch. It's a program that we have partnered with the Navy. And so San Bernardino High School has gone to the finals with that. It's an underwater robot that goes through an obstacle course. And so our students do participate in that. We also have some elementary schools, Marshall Elementary is one of them, that also competes on a national level with that program.
Okay, great. And so I guess maybe making sure that others, because I know my children would have loved participating on those, but they didn't go to San Bernardino High School. Maybe looking at how we can have it at a district-wide level for more students to participate. And then, but I'm glad, or maybe even sharing with the district, because I haven't really seen having them come in with the robotics themselves and kind of demonstrating if there's a possibility. But anyways, I wanted also to look at school gardens. I know you mentioned farmers market. And I know that could be also part of like kind of like a therapy, counseling portion of it with mental health. So if we could look at school gardens, and I'm hoping that school sites are applying for it across the board.
They are. We're seeing some, and also with our facilities, I believe that's been some discussion as well. They've already
Okay, great.
been hitting them up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Dr. White, just a quick, okay.
Dr.
And I
Rogers.
just wanted to know, are we still pairing up with Garner Holt in all of this? Where's our relationship with that work?
So Garner Holt is the two animaker spaces that we have at Chavez and Del Vallejo. They are the ones that are putting together our animaker spaces. And there's Girls in Science that's ongoing right now through the county. So there are different things that we're partnering with. And it really also depends on school sites. Sometimes school sites have asked for a contract with them as well. One of them has it in their dream plan.
And I know in his case, I mean, definitely, the more you know, the more our students will be involved. I mean, it amazes us when we go over there, and I know it was just a couple of schools or one school that had it, but at this point, especially with funding like this, we would want him to come and give a presentation about it, and I'm sure more students would be, because that's the wave of the future. I mean,
Well, we
they're
did-
making the voice of God again. Let me look
Yeah,
back.
good one. So we did work with Garner Holt, and we did ask for a proposal as we went through the RFP process. They were one of the vendors that we considered, and I'll just keep it that way.
All I have.
All righty, thank you. It's funny because Dr. Rodriguez and I were texting each other about that today. They do have a summer boot camp program that's coming up, and actually the county said, let's get you guys some spots, so hopefully we can reserve some of our students for that boot camp in July, so thank you. All right, carrying on.
All right, I don't want to be taken out of the good news train, so one thing that I did forget to mention with ESSER dollars that we have available, we are going to be utilizing that to subsidize the preschool program for those families that do not qualify under the income guidelines. So we know that was a concern raised by a teacher and a parent, and it was board consensus that we we'd like to move forward with subsidizing those
Mr.
programs.
Sullivan, does that mean that we're starting our own preschool programs?
Well, we currently have our own preschool programs, but we receive funding from the California State Preschool Program, but that funding is dictated on income guidelines and qualification.
Right.
For those families that do not qualify for those services, we would subsidize the fees that would be associated with them participating in the program.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So they will participate, but
Correct.
we subsidize the
Correct.
fees.
That's
Okay.
correct.
That's
And,
great.
and just to note, Dr. Flores, that would not mean that we would be able to provide childcare for anybody that asks, because there's a limited number of spaces. So it's all dependent upon the facilities that we have and the amount of slots available.
So make sure that we make that clear for parents. But that's really great that we are offering that service. That'll be really great. Thank you.
Can I ask that, 'cause you all are the ones in the rooms who help facilitate the programs, and I know it's frustrating for some parents when we do programs like the Broadway, I don't know what CAPS group is doing it, but we advertise to the students at these elementary schools, but we don't offer transportation. So to me, it's almost like something not nice to say, hey, here's this program going on, too bad you can't get there. So I hope that when we do offer the programs and we're advertising that the surrounding elementary schools, that somehow we at least think about facilitating transportation to these programs that we're offering. Because a lot of students in our district don't have means of getting the transportation. So if we're going to advertise at a site for the program, we should only advertise if we're thinking in terms of we're going to allow transportation to come from that site or whatever their home site is. Just something to think about. It's because we have the money.
Mr. Tillman, just for clarity, do you, over here, right here, Dr. Monades. Haven't heard my voice in a while, huh? Just for clarity in that. So was it advertised at the district level, but it was something that was specific to a school site, and then it was almost like it was a little bit of a
There were students that participated. We do some type of, no, it was like the elementary school, one of the elementary schools was like
Gomez, I think.
Ramona Alessandra, and they did this big program and we did give them transportation to practice at Indian Springs. So all those kids that participated, they got a flyer saying, this summer we're going to do a Broadway clinic at, I think it's at Indian Springs and one of the schools, but transportation wasn't offered.
I see.
for the
Okay.
kids.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, I think we have about 8 slides left, and they're pretty hefty slides, so if we could try to reserve our questions, write them down if possible. I was hoping to get us out of here by 8:30, but let's see if we could do that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so next slide. So this is a new requirement that districts are going to have to contend for the 2022-23 school year. This is a reserve cap limit, and this was established when the state passed Proposition 2, which is the state rainy day fund. What it did was it created this cap that districts greater than 2,500 had to abide by if certain conditions were met. And those conditions that needed to be met were Prop 98 funding was sufficient to cover ADA and COLA increases, that we were in a test one for Prop 98 funding, that capital gains exceeded 8%, and that the maintenance factor, which is money that the state owed to school districts, had been fully repaid. And that relates back to a debt owed from 14-15. So for 22-23, these all 4 conditions have been met, and so the reserve cap is triggered for districts like ours. So what that means is any unrestricted assigned and unassigned balances can exceed no more than 10% of the total general fund expenditures. This excludes restricted balances. There are ways that the district can contend with this. As we finalize our budget in preparation for our public hearing next week, we will identify whether we are subject to this cap. Right now, based on our estimated actuals, we are projecting 13.7% for these reserves. However, once we go through the 22-23 budget year, depending on our spending patterns, we may fall below that 10% and may not need to take any action. But if we did, our options are we spend down those fund balances. So as Mr. Tillman mentioned, plan deficit spending to bring those balances down. The board can take action to commit fund balances to remove it from the calculation, and the board could do so for things like textbook adoptions, things that we are already designated a purpose for expending those funds on. Or you can transfer funds to support other priorities. So if we were looking at deferred maintenance, providing additional contribution, you could transfer funds to support that. So those are the three options available. As we finalize our projections for the next fiscal year, we will come to the board with information on what the impacts are to us, and we will have to come to a decision on which is the best path to proceed on. We anticipate that we may be close to being just above it or just below it, but we won't know that until our budget is finalized. Okay, so more information to come. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Kimber Sargent, who will be presenting on the Lcap carryover requirement.
Good evening, Dr. Wyatt, Vice President Mr. Tillman, school board members, Superintendent's Cabinet. Again, I'm Kimber Sargent, Director of Categorical Programs under the supervision of Assistant Superintendent Anna Applegate. Tonight, we will go over the new requirement for Lcap. This is a carryover requirement. The carryover for Lcap is based on the district spending the supplemental and concentration funds to increase or improve services for our unduplicated students. As you recall earlier in the meeting, we talked about those three student groups being our low income, English learner, and foster youth students. The requirement is to spend those dollars in proportion to the increase in LCFF funding as a result of that percentage. It gets pretty technical once we get into the explanation of carryover. So I'm going to give you an example with round numbers to try and simplify this as much as possible. For example, if we received $100,000 in supplemental and concentration funds and our unduplicated pupil percentage was 90%, we would need to spend $90,000 towards increasing or improving services for English learner, low income, and foster youth. At the end of the year, we would look at our estimated actuals, meaning how much did we spend or we plan to spend by the end of the year, and we would determine how close we got to that 90,000. So that in that calculation comes up to a percentage. That percentage is called your carryover obligation. So at this time of the year, we're at the point where we have collaborated with our fiscal services department to determine what our estimated actuals are of our supplemental and concentration funding. And for our school district, we have a carryover obligation of 7.7%. Ultimately, that does come down to a dollar amount that we need to make sure that we include in our Lcap for the 22-23 school year. So for our district, that will equate to approximately $33 million, and that will be included in the expenditures that you will see in our Lcap. Tonight, you do have a handout, and I might have given all mine away. Oh, I got it. It looks like this. This is a very simplified at a glance for you so that you can see our priorities within our Lcap. At the pleasure of the board, we can give this to you definitely in more detail, but I know Mrs. Applegate will be going over some of those highlights and the process that we used this year during our Lcap annual update. We'll use this handout when we look at the chart on the next slide. So on this chart, you'll see the amount for supplemental and concentration funding as that bottom bar on your bar graph there. So for 22-23, for supplemental and concentration funding, we have $150,981,048. Our unduplicated pupil percentage, again, that's our low-income foster youth and English learners, that percentage is over 90%. Since that's over 90%, we receive something called concentration grant add-on funding, or here is labeled as Super C. just for ease of referencing this additional money. So that Super C funding is $26,643,714. That money has a further restriction beyond the restriction to use it for increasing and improving services for low-income foster youth and English learners, that it needs to be used on personnel at the school sites to reduce the ratio of personnel to students. The last bar that you'll see on the graph here tonight represents that $33 million, which is our carryover obligation based on the new rule being applied. So in total, you'll see for our LCAP for 22-23, we will account for $210,760,364 during the months of essentially the day that I started in categorical. Up until this point, we have been in the input gathering phase with our educational partners, reaching out to our parent advisory groups, our community groups, holding meetings with just the advisory as well as open meetings, speaking with our school site staff, including our principals, to gather input to develop a plan that reflects our local needs. Again, the items that are in that plan do need to be principally directed towards those 3 student groups. And Mrs. Applegate is going to walk you through what our Lcap goals are. These are goals that we set over the 3-year cycle for our Lcap. The input that we received for each of our 3 goals, and then some of the highlights.
President White, can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Mr. Tillman, please make it quick.
Just so I'm clear on the money you're talking about. So the $177 million is what was allocated for this school year?
So that would be if we had spent everything, we would have had $177 million in our LCAP.
And is that because we received $177 million in funding for this current fiscal year?
This is for the 22-23 fiscal year that we will receive this money.
So, Mr. Tillman, so this year, we received $169 million in supplemental concentration grant. Because of the COLA, the base grant, it increases to $177.6 million for next year.
And this is ongoing funding?
Correct.
And as of that money that we received, $33 million was unspent, she's saying?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I understand that's carry, but does that mean that there's a built-in shortfall of expenditures in terms of ongoing funding? That means you could hire $33 million worth of people ongoing?
So no, so it doesn't mean that. So within the LCAP, those were actions that those funds were designated. Those are actions that we did not execute, and so that funding is available. So and I'll leave it to the programmatic people, but as you look into the next year, those actions continue on because this is a 3-year plan. So yeah, if the plans are executed, the money
And let
would
me
be
just say
spent.
this from a practical perspective. My philosophy is that this year's money is for this year's students, right? So my only fear is that if you do the same thing you did this year for next year, you're going to have the same thing. You're going to have money that's unspent. And I looked at the items. I mean, we have too many needs in these areas for the money not to be spent. So I would just hope that someone has a good feel for where the money is, not the money, but the areas that were documented that were supposed to be spent and didn't get spent, to ensure that it does get spent this time around. Because now you have to spend the budget that you didn't spend this year, and it's been increased already. So that means you have to build in extra expenditures for next year anyway. But on top of that, you have to spend $33 million in one-time money. So as long as everybody's on the same page with that, I'm okay.
So I'm going to let Ms. Applegate comment in a second. But
Yes,
I
I get
will
the
say
pleasure of speaking to that.
Yeah, and I would just add that that's exactly the problem we don't want to have because it is very challenging.
So, Mr. Tillman, this year we had some dollars that were unspent. Fortunately, the county has been more strict with us about saying you can't bundle money and put it aside anymore. You need to move forward. So I'm going to share with you an ambitious but very, very good plan for support to the sites. But let me go back to remind us of our LCAP goals. And I think what I liked about the county, we spent about 4 hours with them last week unbundling, and they want details, and they want specifics, which makes it easier then for us to keep metrics to see if things are working or not. It's not just one big bundle of money. So if we go back to our Lcap goals, you know we have 3 goals around academic achievement, school climate and campus environment, and then student and family and community engagement. Those 3 goals remain the same. And all the input that we got from all stakeholders, our teachers, managers, parents, everybody that inputted for the Lcap, they kept coming up with the same thing, that the schools need more support. The schools need more support. So that was overwhelmingly obvious to us. So as we went in with the county to rewrite the Lcap and to unbundle some of the things that we had, there are some very specific things in here that I will share with you. So the goal around academic achievement, as you know, we are very, very highly concerned about recapturing learning. That's number 1. We need to make sure that our learning for students is accelerated, because we know they need 2 years to make up. And so we have to be very creative and very ambitious. We know that along with that, we have some goals around A through G, STEAM, career pathways, vocational opportunities. We want to open up all of that to our students. And there's going to be a huge push for early literacy. We know that our 3-year-olds, our 4-year-olds, our 5-year-olds are coming to us, and they have great gaps and great needs. So we're going to really have an ambitious plan for early literacy as well. Goal number 2, I know that Ms. Medina mentioned, Rosales Medina mentioned about SEL and wellness centers. Dr. Rodriguez is in talks with all of us, and there are great plans to have those wraparound services so that we're looking at the whole child, because we know that a lot was lost, not just the academics. So we're very focused on that. And you'll see some of that as I go through the Lcap. We want to really help with our community partners. They are there for us, and they're telling us, tell us what you want us to do. So we're committed to working with our community partners and our students and our families to help us. As we know, again, it's a total wraparound of our students, so we're really taking advantage of all of that. So some of the input that was gathered through the Lcap process, much of that revolved around intervention. Our parents said our kids need intervention. They need help with further learning, especially in ELA math and English language development. As you know, we have over 10,000 English learners. That's larger than some districts. And data shows that our English learners took probably the hardest hit of all, as you can expect with distance learning and language. So that's a huge need that we know that we need to address. So we're going to be very strategic about that as well. And then again, with the school climate, attendance. That's a huge red flag for us. Attendance, we need to recapture our kids. We need to do whatever we need to do and be creative and deliberate about it. So you'll hear a little bit more what the plans are there. Counselors, social emotional well-being and mental health was resounding with our families. Our parents said our kids need more support services in the way of counseling and mental health. So there are plans for that as well. Community involvement, we talked about, our parents were very adamant about translation and interpretation and people to help them, to teach them how to get on computers, to do workshops on how some of these programs are helping their students. They want to be involved in their child's education, and they want to help recapture the learning. So they've told us that they want more workshops and more training on all the different intervention programs that we have. And again, as Mr. Sullins mentioned, the board will also have the opportunity for you to tell us what your priorities and funding are if you don't see them here. So as we move in, I'm going to be very specific with the next slide to tell you what some of the plans are. So as we sat with the county, we realized that we had to be more detailed about what we were doing and attaching the dollar amounts and making sure that it aligns with our goals. So I want you to take a look at this plan that we have. It's not necessarily new, but it's decentralized. We've taken these positions that came before you as centrally located positions, and we are pushing them out to the school sites because we realize that having the people at the school sites is what we need to do. And you saw that portion in the Lcap that is actually dedicated to reducing the ratios at the school site with personnel. So this is something that we feel very confident about. We're talking about providing an intervention or an MTSS coordinator or coach at every single school. That person would be the person that would know what all the resources are for SEL, mental health, behavioral health, academics. That would be a person that can then, work with families and give all the resources and supports at the school that the student would need. They'd be looking at data, they'd be making decisions about the tiers of support. We are really big on the multi-tiered system of support. That's something that we are really trying to get in place to make sure that we have fundamentally tier 1 for all of our kids and then add on the resources. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. We also talked about resident guest teachers, increasing that. Dr. Funches and his team have done a fantastic job hiring over, I want to say close to 300 now, Dr. Funches. I don't know the guest teacher. Over 500 positions that Dr. Funches and his team have provided with resident guest subs. And that's important because we now have resident guest subs that stay at the school the entire year as their person, and they're being trained by my team in literacy, in math, and whatever is needed at the school site. And so they become a part of that staff. So we have plans for that as well, to continue that and expand it. We talked about the libraries now, multicultural libraries and different ways that the students can see themselves in classroom libraries and district-wide, providing more resources for the schools. We really, really want to push with tutoring, in-home tutoring. We made an attempt with a couple of tutors, but I know that Dr. Valdez has a couple that are really good, and we know that, again, like she said, having a tutor come to your house is huge for our kids. So investing in these contracts with vendors to come in and provide tutoring for our students. Because our teachers, let's face it, they are helping as much as they can, but they want their vacation and they get tired. So we have the money to contract out and make sure that we have people to tutor our kids. And we brought back field trips, academic and college field trips. Every school site will be getting money for field trips so kids can have that experience. We also have instructional aids in all the TKs. You know, we have a TK expansion. We're going to add instructional aids to all those TKs. All the focus schools, all the schools that have been identified as improvement schools, will be getting instructional aids and educational assistance at the school sites. For counselors, we know that a school that has 300 kids has one counselor, elementary level. An elementary school with 700 kids has one counselor. That's not equitable. So we're going to add counselors to the higher number elementary schools so that they will have, they'll be able to take more students. We added 10 foreign language teachers at the high school level. You made a commitment to make sure that our kids have that opportunity. Every one of our middle school now has foreign language, except 1 or 2, I believe. All of the high schools now, so there'll be 10 additional foreign language teachers. And so we're excited about that. We were able to keep teachers that, we didn't cut any teachers, regardless of class size. We made a commitment to make sure that we stabilize this next year. We know hopefully enrollment will stabilize and we'll get better enrollment. And all those teachers were kept at the school sites. And so they'll be able to help with learning loss as well. So there are many, many things, as you can see, that we've been doing. I know Dr. Rodriguez has contracts with social workers. We're going to add an attendance verifier to every single school. We're going to add a health aide to every single school. I know Dr. Rodriguez is also hiring, I mentioned social workers, but she's also have contracts out for mental and behavioral health support. And that's really expanded. And so now that person that's the MTSS person at the school site will have access to those resources so that all of our principals will be able to offer that to our students. So there are quite a few things that are going on. And I want to go back to the whole MTSS concept. If we approach funding and we approach instruction in that multi-tiered system of support way, it's time that we identify tier 1 for all of our kids. It can't be based on who you know. If you know that person and you ask for an extra teacher and maybe you get it, or you know that director and you ask for an instructional aid and they pay for it, that's not how we should be doing business. Tier 1 for all of our kids, everybody, the health aide, the attendance verifier, the extra MTS, that's base program for everybody, and we commit to that. Then tier 2, the schools like that are the focus schools, then we add more. We add more support. That's what equity is all about. Tier 3, adding that. But the beauty of that too is that, as you know, right now there's money coming everywhere. But you also see the trend that it kind of labels off, and in the past, oh, now we got to cut 25 million. The beauty of approaching it in a tiered system of support, you've identified tier 1. As you peel off the layers, as the money dries off, you don't touch tier 1. You start peeling off all the extras, and then everybody still continues to get that equitable education. So we need to have that approach so that everybody has that quality education, and we add as we see the need. So we are looking at the data, making sure that all these actions are aligned with what we need to do, but they are centered at the site. And so you will hear more about the plan, and I know as we take it forth to the county and hope for approval, we're excited, and I think our staff will be excited to see all the support that will be coming to them at their schools.
Dr. White.
And the list that you have in front of you, we will further unbundle that, because you can see here, like, I think action 1.20 still says academic student support or direct student support. These are some of the positions I was talking about. So they've all been accounted for, and these are ongoing dollars. So we don't have to be in fear so much of adding some of the support that we're adding to the school sites. I will say that, however, adding all these positions to the school site, we may ask for a couple here and there that we might need downtown to support all of this work, but we will bring that to you at a later time. I'm just letting you know that might be a possibility.
All right, can we get through next steps and timeline? We have looks like two quick slides. Is that okay? All right. Okay, Thank you.
Okay, we won't spend too much time on here. So next steps, really in the budget process, we talked a bit about budget committee hearings are ongoing. Ultimately, the legislature needs to vote on and approve a budget as of June 15th. Otherwise, their paycheck is withheld. And then ultimately, after negotiations carry forward, the governor should adopt a budget. If you recall last year, there was a shell budget adopted at June 15th so they could retain their paycheck. And ultimately, negotiations carried on until we received an approved budget from the governor. Correct. And for our district, we are going to continue to update assumptions as necessary as we continue to receive information. We have our public hearing for both budget and Lcap, and I should say Lcap and budget because Lcap always has to be presented and approved first. Lcap and budget on June 7th, and then we will bring back to the board for adoption the 22-23 Lcap and budget on June 21st. And then once we've gone through the budget adoption cycle, we still have steps that come forward related to the budget. We will come back to the board in July to review the priorities and new state dollars that were received as of the enacted state budget. As mentioned earlier, we'll come back in August with any 45 revisions in the 45-day budget revision. And then as we move closer to October, that's when academic achievement, expenditure data, and reports should be available. And then we'll move into the first interim Lcap and academic updates in December. And so with that,
All righty. Thank you, Mr. Solon and staff. That was quite a report, and a lot of information. And we'll move back over to Dr. Flores and Ms. Ceballos, I believe.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, and especially Ms. Applegate for delineating all of this because when we talk about equity, I just want to comment that the fact that every site is going to be given all these services, that's really a great step forward. I really appreciate that very, very much. And, we always talk about attendance and chronic absenteeism, and we do need those, attendance verifiers, but also the mental health, the counselors, the health aides, the nurses. And I've asked teachers that have retired, and I said, if there was one thing that you would have wanted more of, you know what they said? A paraprofessional. A paraprofessional to be another body to be in the classroom. And if you think about it, our teachers are incredible. They have so many ranges of ability and also special needs. Also, and just to have one more adult in there makes a big difference. And then plus extra ones that you're saying for literacy and math. So I appreciate that. I also appreciate that we have, attending to smaller class sizes. I hope that those are targeted towards, our coming through the pandemic, our kids have lost a lot because of the situation. So I think the lower class size will be great in terms of also, I worry about our 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and also everybody, our middle schoolers, and also the high schoolers. But but that's crucial. That intermediate age is really, really crucial. So I hope that you're targeting that for smaller class sizes as well, and wherever we can, because this board has approved smaller class sizes in the past. Ms. Ceballos, we've done that before for high school and also middle school, and where we had the money. And I also appreciate, Ms. Applegate, what you said about Tier 1 and then Tier 2 and Tier 3. As the money subsides, everybody gets Tier 1, and that's really important. And that's best first teaching for our kids. And so thank you very much. I really commend all of you for for the specificity and the targeting across our goals, and then seeing programmatically how all of the expenditures are going to go out. And that's, the money should be spent, like you said, Mr. Tillman, on that year for our kids. So greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Flores. Ms. Ceballos?
Thank you so much for all of the great information. I was really excited to hear everybody's presentation, but more so your part of the presentation, because I'm a huge advocate and proponent of the multi-tier systems of support, as you all know. And so I just have a question about, well, first I'll start with a concern of mine, and that's like the accountability piece, right? So I'm really interested in one of the things that why I was really behind Mr. Irvin's framework of excellence is because it really broke down the district into smaller, more manageable pieces, which in turn meant more accountability, right? Because we are a huge district, and it's very easy to get lost in knowing who all we employ and what all do they do, right? And a great example of that would be like a paraprofessional, or in some cases, like even, let's say 101. A good example would be like a 101 for a student in a special education, right? If a one-to-one aid is provided to a student in special education, sometimes that one-to-one aid is contracted, right? Or even our after-school CAPS people, they're contracted out. And so sometimes they don't know who their immediate supervisor is or who they need to reach out for support when they do need it. And so I guess that's like one of the biggest concerns that I have, that we want to make sure that, yes, we add these, positions and things like that, but that accountability piece is really, we're really keeping that in mind, that piece in mind.
And thank you so much for that. And I completely understand, and I agree with you. We are continuing to work in clusters. That's not going to go away. So the difference is that instead of these people being downtown, they're going to be at the schools. But it's still very much the same type of a delivery where we're giving direct services to kids, but even more because they're going to be housed at the school sites. We will continue in clusters. We will continue with the accountability that we would have done before. And I think the training is what we will house downtown, which is why I was saying that maybe we might need a couple of positions, because yes, we're going to put all these people at the sites, but we want them highly trained and highly qualified. So then that continues to fall on us to make sure that they're trained. One of the reasons why the resident sub-guest teacher program was so successful, and why, when I say successful, is because we do surveys, we have feedback that they gave us, and they tell us, I really felt like I was effective because I was trained on how to teach reading. Big difference than just putting a sub-teacher out without any training. So we will continue to do that type of training, but the people will be at the site. We're still clustering, so that's not going to change. And by the way, the overarching goals, the 5 goals, academic achievement, college and career, SEL, health and safety, and family and community engagement, that doesn't change. That came from our community, and that's what they want. So we will continue to do that. We'll just be more aligned, and the dollars will be going directly to the schools and to personnel to lower some of those ratios.
Awesome. So again, I am really excited to hear that. And as we move forwad, again, I'm going to just FYI, I guess, going to be looking for that accountability piece of it, because I tell you, too many times, even in my work area, too many times we have additional people come on board, and sometimes they're completely clueless, not because they don't know what they're doing, but because that leadership component or that direction that they need is not there readily available to them. And then the other piece that I wanted to ask about was how is the general education piece of the MTSS component working together with the special education department? Because again, one of the things that I often see is one of two things. Sometimes schools and school districts will utilize special education as their tier 2 intervention, right?
Tier
Or,
3, actually.
huh?
Tier 3, actually, but yeah, it's not.
Well, tier 2, I mean, in even worse cases, because they don't have that smaller setting to be able to provide that tier 2 intervention. And so oftentimes they're utilizing that RSP pullout as their tier 2 intervention support. And so I guess my question is, how is the district working, in bringing together and aligning both special education and the general education, teams in working together through those processes when there's obviously different routes to special education assessment. You have on the one end parents that can directly request, the assessment, and then at that point you kind of are left with kind of jumping all of those processes. But then on the other hand, if a parent doesn't request it right away and a teacher wants to initiate it, sometimes the MTSS process is not as clear to the teachers, and so they're often left with having to contact parents on the down low, if you will, and advising them, hey, because I'm needing the help, there's usually more barriers for me. But if you come and request the assessment, then, the school has to respond within 15 days and so forth. So how are we?
So I think the most important thing, the MTSS, the multi-tiered system of support, is the structure to provide the instruction. The process you're talking about is the SST. That's the paperwork and the identification moving forward toward testing. If you have a very high quality, very well done, multi-tiered system of support, then tier 1 is appropriate for all kids. We just make modifications depending. So we make modifications for ELs, we make modifications for our advanced learners. But the key is that you identify the standards, the power standards for that grade level, whatever instruction needs to take place. And if you're really good at that, and the teachers understand that very well, they do that with their special education students too. They just provide accommodations. If they're not successful there, then they move to tier 2. The problem is that tier 1 has not been as clear. We've really spent the entire year working with our principals and with our teachers to identify what is the essential instruction for all of our kids, regardless of who they are. We just need to make some modifications. And if they need further assistance, they go into tier 2. After tier 1, when they go into tier 2, that's when we start looking at the SST process. Now that's all the paperwork that we have to do to say they're not making it, so what are we going to do? And we provide intervention, and we progress monitor, and we look to see if they're making progress. If they're not, we go another tier. That's still not special ed identification, as you know. But that's more intensive, possibly one-on-one, possibly contracted services, whatever it takes. Once that doesn't happen, then and only then do they get referred, depending on what the teams decide. So if you don't have a well-organized structure of instruction, that's why that happens, because people don't recognize what they should be doing in tier 1, and they push quickly. They're not learning, oh, let's push them through. But we need to be very good, and we spent the entire year with our principals talking about tier 1, our curriculum guides. Teachers, if I'm a 3rd grade teacher, here are my standards. I know exactly what I need to teach. I have the autonomy to do it the way I want to do it, but now I know these are the power standards I have to teach to make sure that the kids are on level.
So just to clarify, then, does this plan, is it targeting more so the tier 1 aspect of the?
All the tiers.
Okay.
So tier 1, for our kids, we know that attendance is tier 1 for all of our kids because we've had such loss. But then there are those that we saw through the data that had severe chronic absenteeism. Now that's tier 2. And so maybe tier 3, a one-on-one or a contract or something like that. So all of our kids right now, we have that upside down triangle where we have more problems within tier 1. That's what we're trying to fix right now. Because once we get that down well, and then kids don't fall through the cracks as much.
So let me add to that. Part of the work that we've also been trying to do over the last year is to have more integration between what happens in ed services and what happens in student services, as far as special education and providing additional supports for students who have need. And so I'll give you an example of one of the ways, kind of looking at the over-identification of special education students. So for example, this past year, we partnered with special ed to loan out a BCBA. to be able to look at some of those students who have not been identified as special education students, but are having behaviors in a classroom, behaviors that are so much that a teacher is not able to, within their interventions, not able to provide the support that that student needs. That student continues to be in general ed, we provide that service through the BCBA. We provide additional intervention and support through like check-in, check-out model. Next year, as part of this plan, Positive Youth Development will have their own BCBA that is for specifically general education students, so that we can provide those services so that they are not then referred to special education, because there are programs and support for gen ed kids that don't necessarily need to have that extra support. So part of the work that we're also trying to do on the instructional side is provide teachers through Tier 1 additional interventions and support for behavior and academics, so that they can build in those structures for students in Tier 1. So for example, if let's say a student is not learning multisyllabic words, just because a student doesn't know how to do that doesn't mean that they would automatically refer them to an SST or special education. Perhaps the teacher needs additional training to be able to work with students that are having that difficulty, and maybe they need additional strategies like centers, for example, or more time with the teacher. And so those things are being built into the Tier 1 so that there isn't as many students being referred into special education programming.
Just add one last thing. Professional development looks totally different. So my team, along with Dr. Rodriguez's team, Dr. Esquivel's team, they're planning together now, because we had over 172 different professional developments. Well, if you're a teacher coming back from this pandemic, you're trying to get your class back, that's a lot of time to be out of the classroom. So we're having an approach where it's collaborative between the divisions. If we do a PD on math, we get somebody from Sandra's division on behavior and SEL and infusing some of those strategies. Mr. Acosta or Mr. Ojeda give us somebody to tell us these are grade EL strategies. And we approach that collectively so that we're not killing our teachers, pulling them out of the classroom right and left. So that's changed also the way we do professional development. We're embedding and we're helping teachers to get better working with all of our different student groups.
Well, again, I appreciate.
Thank you. Very good questions.
I know that it was a long response, but I will definitely be interested to continue to, have this information presented to the board, maybe on a more frequent basis, in terms of what are the Tier 1s, Tier 2, and Tier 3, and how the two are working together. Thank you.
All righty, Mr. Biles, Mr. Tillman, and Dr. Daddy Rogers.
Thank you. I want to commend Dr. Funches. You say you hired 500 people, which is pretty amazing. But I want to thank the board, too, for approving the pay raises and giving the benefits, because you know as well as I do, it's a competition out there. So people are looking at pay right now and benefits to determine what school district they're going to go to, and that's going to continue. I know you're probably still having challenges getting people, but those things do make a big difference. It is, though, right? Yep. Okay. And then in terms of the one big issue I have at the high school level, and I talked to Mr. Irvin about it and some other staff in the district, but I hope I'm off base, but it seems like there are students that hang out at the high schools and aren't engaged. Are we working on that? Can I be assured that I don't have the same group of students not going to class at a high school every day, day in and day out, without personnel contacting them and trying to find some way to engage them to ensure they get an education or be offered some other option? And not, the term I was heard was sometimes the younger kids, they say they're going to let those kids age out so they can go to a continuation school, so they're just allowed to linger at sites.
Hello? Okay. No, that is not what we want, and that's our intent with lowering the ratios. We're bringing the extra personnel to the school sites to help with that.
And are we able to hire the extra personnel?
Yes, this is what is in the plan, and that's what we want to do.
Okay.
I know we'll probably kill Dr. Funches over there, but yes, we do want to lower the ratio to have more of a personal touch. And those the attendance verifiers and the attendance, I forget what the other technicians, are the ones that will be going out to the homes, contacting, making sure kids are in classrooms and those
Yeah,
things.
but my point is you don't have to go to the homes. They're at the site, not going to class.
Yeah, well, and they'll get them from the sites as well. So
So-
we've talked about that. I know Dr. Rodriguez was working on that as well.
So part of what we're talking about here is changing the way that our high schools deliver instruction, as well as keeping kids interested and engaged so that they will want to come to class. And so the traditional model of the lecture or, a teacher who just kicks them out needs to change. And so while we don't have that answer, I think that's something that we continue to look to see how we can change that. That goes to culture, it goes to professional development for our teachers, but it also at the core is the social emotional learning, that kids feel a connection at school and that they have a connection with an adult who will help them and guide them with mentorship, et cetera, to keep them to go into class. But I think, with one of the things that we've been doing is working on the instructional practice so that class isn't boring. We know that if class is boring, kids are not going to want to go.
Because I really want to emphasize, I think we should, not try to reinvent the wheel. I know I only go to CSBA or maybe one other conference, but you all go to educational conferences all the time. So there has to be somebody out there talking about having this problem, and there's a program that works best for those students that have habitually been hanging out on campus at a high school level, and how they were able to engage them and get the results. Because you can even spend one-time money on programs like that. So I hope we're looking at doing that. I know at the conferences I've been to, a lot of it's been programs that focus on, they call it chronic absenteeism, but the programs actually contact the students, go to the homes, find out what the barriers are, do all those type of things. So I hope we're looking at spending some of this money on those type of issues.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And Mr. Tillman, just to mention. Hello? Hello? Okay. Remember the parent that came from San Bernardino High School? The next day, we sent staff out, and I know their staff was heightened, their awareness was highly heightened, I guess I should say. I drove by the next day, there was not one student out on campus, not
Great.
one.
That's what I'm talking
So
about.
just a deliberate effort like that helps, but the long term, as Dr. Rodriguez says, is engaging them. But we did get them all back in class.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Daddy Rogers.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. I wrote down here people too, because I keep hearing it over and over again, and this is truly going to take people for sure, for sure. But I also, in addition to what you were saying, I wrote down safety too, because I didn't hear a lot about, I know it's, one of the slides talked about climate, and then it said safe environments, but we really have to spell that out for our parents, for our community, because right now everybody's coming up with all, from walls to whatever, but we have to explain to them that, these are our children. We're not going to create prisons or anything like that, but we also got to let the community know, what are we going to do? What are we really going to do? Even talking about the hanging out, that's unsafe. And we know just recently, what was it, like 14 individuals were unfortunately shot, and that was young people out at a hookah bar. So there's got to be some education and some assistance when we talk about talking with our parents. We really need to explore what drugs are really doing now. Fentanyl is killing instantly, not later, but instantly. So, more conversation on safety versus saying we're going to lock them up and throw away the key. They need to hear that. And I didn't hear much of it tonight, and all the money and everything that we were talking about, we got to do that. The other thing was financial literacy. I know we talked about that before, but that's another huge thing that even legislators are pushing. So while we have, and I know we mentioned it probably a couple board meetings ago, but we really need to say what we're doing, because that's also helping our students understand the future of finances and all of those things that go along with making money. What are you going to do with the money? And then when we were talking about the kids hanging out, I couldn't believe, but I had a Cal State graduate was sharing with me, convincing me the importance of gaming and what it does, and I didn't hear that either. And the fact that it's hand-eye coordination is more than just, just sitting here in front of this electronic device, which I usually would say this is wasting time, but it's not. I see the other side, so I hope we're looking at that and encouraging kids to create apps, and we never know what we may get out of this. And those are the things from this young man, as he was explaining to me, what keeps him around, you know. And I went to the our Native American graduation, and it was a student that was sharing with me that he wasn't sure what he was going to do. And at the same time, simultaneously, I said, well, what are you interested in? I said gaming, he said gaming. And so how wonderful it would be if we can connect them to those things. And then before, I heard we talked about mental health, but I don't even know if our district has done mental health first aid. I remember 2 years ago or prior to COVID, that was supposed to be everyone. Everyone was supposed to do mental health first aid, just like first aid. And it really is an eye-opener as to think you don't have to be a professional, but you have those basic skills to identify what is happening with that student. So I would like to revisit that to find out what we've done in the capacity of mental health first aid. Is free. It doesn't cost anything other than your time to do it. And then lastly, GenGo, I'm saying it, GenGo, because I don't know what other name to call it. And whether we liked it or not, it was an entry way for our students to do internships and to connect right here in our community. And again, there's money, but there must be a reason to spend it correctly. And I know down the stretch before COVID, we had to come up with $500,000 to continue that program because something went awry with the county or whatever the protocols were. Something happened.
What was it called?
Generation Go.
Generation
Go.
So I hope that we reconnect on that and find out what we need to do. And if the county, no, they don't have to pay for it for us. We have the funding and money to do it. So I would like to see us revisit or talk more about those opportunities for our students as well. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dowdy Rogers. Dr. Flores?
I forgot to mention again the mariachi. I wonder what the update is. Does anyone know about our district mariachi at all?
I thought didn't we have an update recently?
Yes,
I
there
could've
was
swore we did,
mariachi.
right?
I can't remember which school it was, but it disbanded before COVID. and
Was
I
that in the
think
Friday
our-
update?
Yes, we put,
It was,
we
huh?
put an update in the
I didn't
Friday
see
update.
that on
I
the
thought it
Friday
was.
It's a
update.
few weeks back. I can get it for you.
One of
There
the
was
Friday
there
updates.
was a program at Lincolnshire, I believe, and so Scott Nelson is putting together programming so that we can bring back the mariachi to the elementary schools. That was in the Friday update.
How long ago was that, I wonder? But it's just an update, but what's the status of it? And I mean, if it's just while he's bringing it together, what's the money? What's the plan? You know, is it just one? Are we going to do it? You know,
No, there's no issue with money, Dr.
We've been talking about
Flores.
this for 5 years. Yeah.
No, they disbanded because two of the kids were out. So it's not a money issue. We'll pursue that, and we'll make sure that we reach out to them again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Flores, absolutely. Ms. Rosales Medina? All right, thank you very much. And everybody's asked all my questions, but I was thinking about doing it again. I'm just kidding. No, you know I won't do that. But no, folks, great presentation, a lot of information, a lot of money. I think our next activity, which I'll make very quick, as a board, we could definitely start looking at some items and prioritizing. Even like things you just mentioned, Dr. Flores, I'm super excited about that, just so you know. Many programs, absolutely. That's just one of many. But I believe Mr. Son just had a quick closing comment, and then we'll go on to our next activity. But thank you,
Absolutely.
team, again. Great job.
So I just wanted to thank the board for the time and attention this evening. But I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge several people. So Trish Huey and the fiscal services team who have been working very hard. Ms. Kimber Sargent and the categorical team as well have been working hard. And Pearson's with the ELOP funds, a lot of hard work. And I really do want to say that this is a cross-divisional effort. We are over $1 billion budget. And so that's no small potatoes. And it really takes everybody's involvement to come up with these plans and ideas to present to the board that really represent the needs of our communities and educational partners. So I want to thank all of my colleagues and their divisions for all their hard work, because it doesn't happen with one person.
Well, Mr. Son, I couldn't ask for a better segue into our next activity. And again, amazing job. And And folks, board, we've talked about the board top 10 for quite some time, and I thought it was a really good tool that we had in the past. And I had Karen pull up our last time we documented, and if you look, it was back in 2020, June of it looks like about June of 2020, somewhere around there. Actually, April 2000, yeah, June, April 2020, in that time range. And, I know there's been a lot of concerns that have come up over the last couple of years about, this is what we want to do, can we do this? And it's been very difficult with COVID. I think we all know that our top priority for about the last 2 years has really been safety, and trying to maintain a high level of rigor and excellence with teaching our scholars and working with our staff, but maintaining safety at the forefront to ensure that everybody's okay. It's put a high level of stress on all of us, as we've known. It's worn us down tremendously, probably heightened a lot of different emotions in us that we normally wouldn't like. I think we've seen that. But at the same time, we're starting to see, I think, that light at the end of the tunnel coming out of this. We know COVID is still very present, still very dangerous, and we need to be careful. But at the same time, we need to focus on our goals, as we just saw in this great Lcap presentation, and us as a board together collectively on moving this district forward. I know we've had conversations about this, but it's time to put the rubber on the road, to put our top priorities that we see as individual board members, then to come together collectively and identify at least 10 top priorities. I had Ms. Cunningham give you a copy of what we had 2 years ago. It's pretty interesting to look at because, boy, have times changed in 2 years. I'm sure all of you are looking at that list going, well, heck, we've done half these things, if not more, and that's not really that important anymore when it was a top 10 just 2 years ago. So really think about that when you look at the list. And then also she gave us the list of the board ongoing, what was it? Let me make sure I say the right one because I have more than board ongoing initiative reports. And even when I looked at those, I checked off like half of them, saying I don't really think we need those reports anymore. So we kind of talked about it earlier. I think, yeah, they have, and that's fantastic because that's what we were hoping for. And I think we've sometimes lose sight of, well, we want to do all these great things Mr. Tillman was talking about earlier. They're already done. And these were top 10s and ongoing initiatives just 2 years ago that we've accomplished as a district. So please think about that and applaud yourselves, all of you, this board and our district, on getting those things done between COVID and now, right? And that's not even the district. I mean everybody. All of us inclusively, collectively getting this done. So the question to ask now is, well, what's our next priorities moving forward? And I've heard a lot of them from, that's why I didn't ask any more questions, because I was like, oh, they're asking them all right now. And, coming up with all these great ideas with our executive cabinet team. And I'm like, yep, you're going to get a chance to put that on paper here very soon. So please look at the top 10 we had, which again, probably aren't our top 10 anymore. Look at our board ongoing initiative reports that we've accomplished a lot of those. If you need more information, I can have Ms. Cunningham even send you more reports, which was our future agenda items. And I think there was one other report, but I didn't really want to convolute everything right now because I want us to kind of put some stuff down on paper. As you can see, we have a board top 10 worksheet, about as simple as it comes, right? 5 straight lines on there. Might want to put your name on there, though. We need something for our name so we know who we are. I already did 4 while everybody was talking because I was listening to your ideas and saying, oh, I like that one, I like that one. I'm going to modify that one. So as you can see, I've already put 4 on here. I will say this, none of them are on the top 10 that we used to have. Not a single one. So I'm thinking we need to look forward, look in advance and what it is we may want to do. And but even though I just put one on here, it's one that I think we all want. And I'll just give you an example, like implement wellness centers at all high schools, right? I think we're doing that. If we haven't fully done that, committed to it, then that was, did you? Thank God I want that on the top 10. No, I'm just kidding. That's why I put it out there. No, but really, that's what I want you to do right now is really think what is it that you believe is a priority. And what I would also look at and try to hope for is alignment. Right? When we talk about alignment with the Lcap, with our district goals, so you're not saying this is what we want, but not what the district Lcap's saying, right? I know you guys are all laughing at me on that, but some sort of alignment there, right? So it comes together as a plan. Dr. Flores.
Dr. Wyatt, are you going to agendize this for next board meeting so that we can submit them and then we have a discussion?
I actually hope you can submit them to Ms. Cunningham by tomorrow night.
By tomorrow night?
That's our goal. And then what she will do is establish a list. We have 5 each, potentially 25 different priorities, but I imagine there'll be a lot of overlap. Some
okay.
happen to have between 15 and 20 or
So
something, and we'll
just
probably
send
towards
them
the
to
top
her,
10.
and then it'll be an agenda item for us
Yes,
to
ma'am.
discuss.
You
Okay,
got it,
great.
Dr. Flores.
Okay, got it.
Mr. Tillman.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point. I forgot we had that. We had a list for future agenda items, but I want to clarify that the way it happens is you say you have an item you want to agendize, and you look for consensus. If you get
Thank you, Mr. Tillman.
If you get the consensus, then it's an item that we agree is going to be agendized.
Yeah.
So I just want to be clear. So I know, Mr. Bio, you mentioned items and usually, you would take your top item you want and say, this is what I think is important. Do I see a consensus to agendize it?
Yes.
If you don't get the consensus, which is 3 other board members, then it doesn't get agendized. It's always been that way. So, but then you know for sure whether or not it's going to be agendized, right? You're not thinking there's some other process. And it's important because the way board meetings go, and when the president is creating the agenda, there's very little space for an agenda item because it's going to increase the time. So it is going to be something that we know that the board as a whole wants to discuss on the item. Once we get the list and we prioritize them, and then it's up to Dr. Wyatt to include them in future meetings. But I just wanted to be clear. And if that's changed, because that was past practice, if that's changed and you want to do it a different way, we can. I'm just saying that's the way it was done in the past.
No, Mr. Tillman, and thank you for bringing that up. Actually, on my notes, I highlighted it, circled, and underlined it, but I hadn't mentioned it yet, that, when we get to the selection process of the top 10, it will be with board consensus. Yeah, it won't be, and here's the point where we might get our feelings hurt, right? Well, I want this one so bad. Well, I only got one vote, including mine, that was 2, but we didn't have a board consensus. So it's important, one, that we are able to express our priorities, but even more important, that we come to consensus on items. Okay, and that might be some posturing on our part or selling on our part, right? It could be. But I don't, honestly, when we did this before, it wasn't that hard. When we picked our top 10 out of the list, it was amazing how close they were. And if you look at the old list, there's only 8 on there. So it may only be 8. It might not necessarily be 10.
We dwindled it down.
Yeah, we
it
dwindled
was
it down.
like 20 one time,
Yeah.
or 30. It was a bunch.
And that's what I wanted Mr. Viles to see, because there were, and I didn't give you the board follow-up that Mr. Tillman's talking about, because it's 1, 2, 3 pages front and back. But if you could see, each branch of cabinet had priorities on here, and I always felt bad because there's always seemed like one branch had more educational services. Always had the most on there. I'm like, oh my God, that poor person. Is that Ms. Applegate? Oh yeah, see, always had the most priorities on there. I'm like, that's not fair, but life's not fair. No,
Just
I'm just kidding.
some institutional history. We used to ask for things, and then people forgot. So around 2010, 2011, we decided that we would write them down and follow up. And that's when that practice started. Yeah. Because, and then we started prioritizing and getting consensus. But usually it would just people would forget and we wouldn't have any follow-up. So and I think it's a really great practice. A lot of boards follow our practice, by the way, because they also, people forget, unless you have a process to do it.
No,
Yeah.
Dr. Flores, and thank you so much for saying that, because, I didn't want to overwhelm everybody with all the forms yet, because I wanted us to really get this process started. But like for Mr. Viles, we will definitely get her the board follow-up handout, because, the neat thing about it, and I look at my name's not on there a lot, somebody know you listen to me, but
means
you
your
get
stuff
your
got
name next
done.
to your priority, and it'll say Mr. Viles right here, and it'll say like the things that you want, because you bring them up all the time in board meetings. You could say, hey, what happened to mine right here? I asked on 4/7/20, because it even puts the date that you requested it on, and what branch it falls under, and requested by who. And so I know you've made these lists, and trust me, this list will grow, and your name will be in this column over here. And it's just a great tool for monitoring. What we do know is that they don't all get done maybe in a year or 2. And you're like, dang, that's taking long. But this is a big shift, and I've learned that as a board member, that there's priorities I came on 6 years ago when we talked about SEL and wellness centers that were a priority to me that are finally coming to fruition, but we probably still won't reach those for maybe another couple years. So one thing I had to learn was patience in this position, which was hard as heck. But I just wanted you to kind of understand where we're going so you can see this. I'll even give you this one when we're done so you have it.
So-
We go to
yeah,
Ms.
so my question-
Dr. Daddy Rogers and Dr. Flores, and I'll wrap it
I
up.
don't remember if it does actually say future agenda items on there. I know we talked about this, but did it actually say future agenda
does.
item? It does?
agenda
So we
items, yeah.
had, because that's the one I can't see
And
that
that's
one.
this
so,
little
yeah.
form here. I
That one
haven't
that
showed you
had
that one
future
yet.
agenda, okay.
And you can look at this,
Okay.
you can't see it, but all the gray that's on there, which is half those items, are done.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I imagine if I took my pen and went through a bunch of these, more of them would be done.
But we
So, yeah,
prioritize
we
those
condensed.
also.
Yeah,
And I
future agenda
remember
items.
we condensed, but
I'll
I
give you this
didn't
one, too.
remember future agenda. And does the future agenda item tell you when it was coming, or it just said it was coming?
It said what date it was requested, just so you know. So some of these
Yeah,
go
come.
back to 8/19, but that one's crossed out now. So our oldest one on future agenda items right now would have been 4/20.
And it was coming, okay.
That was kind of not the right
And then
example, but
sometimes
4/20.
when something urgent would come up, we didn't put it
Well, we
on
moved
there.
right up.
We just moved it up.
With
Because it
consensus.
was urgent, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this, is that it's transparent, it's out in the open, and if we decide something needs to move onto this list and something needs to come off this list, we do it as a group. And it has worked, and that's why I'm super excited about getting back to this.
Dr. Wyatt, are we done with that? Before we leave, I'd like to say something.
Yes, and so if you can, if you're ready, please give your board top 10, even though it says 5 on their worksheet, to Ms. Cunningham. Please put your name on it. Dr. Flores, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I just wanted to acknowledge Dr. Monitis, because I believe this is your last board meeting with us. And so I know for myself, I just want to thank you for all your service that you have given us to all our community and our district, and worked with us, the good and the bad, and the difficult, and also, just have always been, very, very present for all of us, and just want to wish you the best. I think we've prepared you to be a great superintendent. I'm just being facetious, I'm sorry, but the experience, I think, has been, very ample and so forth. And especially, I read a little bit about Worcester. They have dual language programs. So I think that will be a great asset for them, knowing that you, and also that you speak Spanish and so forth. And so I just want to wish you the best, and Godspeed. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Flores, I'm sure each one of us could echo that about Dr. Manadas, and, jokingly but not jokingly, if you could work here in San Marino City with this school board, you can work anywhere.
Yeah.
Let me just say that. But no, this is truly a city that requires, and a district and community that requires everything from us. And you have delivered on every level, and that's why you're going to become a superintendent here very soon, close to your daughter, and I couldn't think of a better opportunity and change in life. How amazing that is. So again, Dr. Menares, we truly appreciate you. So ending on a great note, let's go ahead and.
Didn't Dr.
Mr. Tillman had to go.
Didn't-
No more sad news, no, no.
Yeah, come on, Mr. Tillman.
I said no
Go
more
ahead.
sad news, go ahead.
But didn't Dr. Escobar?
But he's not his last, this is not
and
your
Dr.
last,
But has
though.
that, I don't know, has that been?
Oh,
Right,
sorry.
That has
I
not.
don't
Let's
know.
stop.
Dr. Escobar, is this
No,
your
no,
last?
No,
No.
That's
No,
not-
no.
That's not out yet.
No, okay.
Not, yeah.
So next board meeting, we'll talk a little bit about great things of accomplishments of other folks
Absolutely.
that we get a chance to, but let's go ahead. Mr. Tillman, I know this is your favorite part of the meeting.
Yeah, and you will be missed.
Move to
You know
adjourn.
that.
All right.
Second.
We have a move in a second. Thank you, everyone. Great meeting. I know we went a little bit over, but we always have great questions, that's why, and even better answers.